and it's quite, now, the problem that I want to raise here is that INEC promised Nigerians that beginning from March this year, because we started the first phase of CVR in August the previous year, we promised, and that the promise we're making to everybody, come from March, your PVCs will be ready. As I speak to you, we haven't printed any PVCs, from the three phases of CVR. And therefore, we are going to address or face a major challenge of printing and distribution of permanent voters cards. I don't know whether it is possible to make any amendments in the legal framework of the election, to accommodate, the use of ID cards other than the permanent voters cards. That is a major issue for discussion. So as we are talking, we have not printed, and the logistics is very difficult because the emphasis is on collection by registrants, not on distribution. And if you were to distribute, INEC lacks the capacity to be able to do that. So I believe that going forward, the commission will need to take a major decision in terms of the level. And if cards are printed, first and foremost, they are not yet printed. If they are printed, what will be the levels of distribution? Would you want Nigerians who have registered and are expecting their PVCs to come to INEC offices at the local government level? If you are doing that, it will only be like in Plateau, in Jos, and 17 other local government headquarters. Are you going to, or are you going to do it at ward level or registration area levels, which is very expensive? Can the commission afford that this will be done? But basically, if we want to incentivize collection, we need to devolve and decentralize, the distribution of permanent voters cards, and that will have to be at the world level. And I think that INEC will have to make a clear decision on this. It's very important, because if you don't do that and develop the protocol around distribution or collection, you will find a situation in which many influential politicians will come and collect permanent voters cards for people that will never get, those cards. So I think there's need for a very big internal conversation within INEC. And as this exercise is going on, up to as this exercise goes on up to January next year, INEC will have to be up and doing in terms of providing real-time public updates and information on collected and uncollected, new permanent voters cards. I don't want to talk about the cleanup of the voter register because I don't think there's time for that. We rejected the voter verification for good reasons. But I think post 2027, INEC will have to dedicate a time for the cleanup of the voter register, because that is a major weak link in our electoral process. We do not even know how many of those on our register are dead, have left the country, have relocated in terms of residencies, and so on and so forth. Now, the second major milestone that we have crossed is the conducting party congresses and primaries. And many of us followed this process. And it's heartbreaking that we have not learned any lessons. The institutional weaknesses of political parties and the attitude of politicians came out in bold relief, and so both the party congresses and the party primaries were conducted without transparency. The political parties, to begin with, do not want to subject themselves to accountability, and therefore conducting transparent congresses and primaries is something they are not willing to do. So as I talk to you, some of the major litigations from the primaries conducted are in the courts. And we are told by, the state offices are not even supposed to receive the court processes. So if you have a court process to serve on INEC and you are in Jos, you can't come to INEC office in Jos. You have to go all the way to Abuja. Although a few, came or were referred to the state offices, we don't have a comprehensive picture of cases that are before the courts, as fallout of the party primaries. But that also highlights one important dilemma, and we need to resolve this going forward. One is, even if political parties are willing to subject themselves to transparent and open primaries, does INEC have the capacity to do monitoring? If you have the capacity to do monitoring, what is the importance, what is the essence of the report of INEC officials about primaries conducted? And it is obvious that we cannot, as INEC alone, effectively monitor party primaries and congresses. And I thought in the past we came close to thinking of collaboration with the civil society to be able to do this, but we haven't done that, and there's lack of capacity to do this. In the absence of unbundling of INEC, I think we need to think through, because we do not even have the capacity. And even if we have the capacity, the regulatory power of INEC in this process is questionable, because at the end of the day, political parties do what they want, and we are not in the position to checkmate them or to force them to do what is right. Now, between now and the next election in January, there will be some other important things that we are looking out to. One of them is the electioneering campaign, which for presidential and national assembly elections will start on August 19, and the one for governorship and state assembly election will start a month after. Um, and we are in the position to do so many things, to monitor electioneering. How do we, for example, ensure that parties and candidates do not mobilize on the basis of sentiments of regionalism, of ethnicity, and of religion? How are we able to enforce that hate speech will not dominate campaigns? How are we going to ensure that politicians and candidates focus on issues, on programs they want to deliver, and provide options to the one that the present government is implementing, in order to use that as the basis of mobilizing supporters to vote for them at the election? But the bigger problem that I think we need to look at is the fact that party finance has changed a little in terms of the figure allowed for candidates in different categories. We know, for example, that the president now can spend up to 10 billion. And in that descending order, you have governors, National Assembly members, and so on. I think the decision in the law to increase the amount of expenditure allowed by politicians and political parties is probably because costs have risen, and therefore democracy, is not an easy thing. You require money to mobilize, you require money to do logistics, you require money to do so many things. But we are back, we are face to face with the dilemma of the role of money in our politics. What is the capacity of INEC to track the finances of parties and candidates? They have trained INEC officials in terms of the techniques, in terms of the tools to deploy, to be able to effectively track. But how effectively can we do this tracking? What is the capacity of institutions that have been mandated, to check how money is used in the electoral process? The ICPC, the EFCC, and so on. And from our own experience, these are not institutions that are willing to do their work. They lack the capacity to do it, and they lack the courage to be able to do it. So we need to deal with the dilemma, in terms of how can we keep political parties and candidates within the statutory limits that are defined in the law. And we also know that in terms of what will happen on election day, vote buying and what have you will be the order of the day. And I think this is something we require collaboration, very serious collaboration, probably including INEC and civil society coming together to agree on a memorandum of understanding or how we can collaborate to effectively monitor and police the activities of the members of the political class. And I think this is something that we can't run away from. I also want to mention a big task ahead of us, and that has been the major link of our previous elections: training of poll officials. For me, if you want elections that are credible, that are free and fair, you need to devote a lot of time, resources, into the training of polling officials. And I'm talking about both the regular staff of INEC that will be deployed for election, as well as the ad hoc staff that will require at polling unit levels. We need presiding officers that must be drawn from the NYSC. If you don't have enough, which is the case all the time, you have to go back to those who served in the previous year. We need to think about their training. We need to think about the SPOs, the supervisory presiding officers, who are in charge of distributing election materials to presiding officers, and who must be in the rack centers to do this. Many a times they sabotage the election itself because they can collude with politicians not to even distribute materials, or when they distribute, they don't distribute enough. The number of days we have for training of ad hoc staff is usually 2 days. 2 days are not enough. And when we train them for 2 days, they don't even have the equipment, that the beavers, we don't have enough of them for training, for people to learn practically how to operate them on election day. So we often protect our beavers, and we don't make them available in good number so that people can effectively train with the beavers. We need to think seriously about this. And INEC itself is always floppy in terms of making available training materials for the ad hoc staff that we are training. From my experience so far, in many cases, the printed training manuals arrive after training. Trainings have been conducted. And then you begin to wonder, what is the purpose of printing the training manuals when trainings have been concluded? We speak to our people, in ICT. They say, well, in the Electoral Institute, well, they say it's not a problem. They have the electronic version of the training manual, which all ad hoc staff are supposed to have access to and train themselves, with their own phone. But the truth of the matter is that how many of the people that we recruit as ad hoc staff have Android phones? Then many of them use touchlight, phones. So how are you going to then use the platform, the e-manual, to support the training? And we keep reminding that we need, in the light of the realities we face, think of adding one more day and do proper training. And also, we need to talk to the NYSC, particularly because of the attitude of the core members who don't even sometimes pay attention to training, but because they are guaranteed that whatever happens, they will be deployed anyway, we then have challenges that we need, to all of us need to really deal with. The last important thing I want to speak about uh, just before the election, in terms of major activities, is the result management and collation processes. The result management and collation processes. All of us agree that incrementally, INEC has deployed technology in the electoral process, and the deployment of technology has in many ways infused the process with a lot of transparency. But at the same time, we must admit that we have also created doubts. We have also eroded public confidence because of the way we have handled technology, because of the way technology on its own is quite important, but the human factor and the human intervention is a key challenge for Nigeria's electoral process that we need to take clear steps, because where we actually, abuse the electoral process and the votes of the people is in the collation process. And there are problems that I would like to point out, given what the law now says. Number one, at the polling unit, from what we now hear, there will be a Form EC8A, which is a hard paper. After the elections have been conducted at the polling unit, votes are counted, the scores are entered for candidates and parties. Um, uh, Party agents who are there, security officials, they will sign the Form EC8A, which is hard copy. The next thing, you proceed to transmit that result into the IREV. In the past, IREV had no clear legal status, but on the basis of the 2026 Electoral Act, IREV is now legally recognized, and therefore transmission into IREV is very important. And unlike before, that IREV was just for public viewing and for the public to follow the results, the status of IREV, has now been enhanced. So we must deal, with the compulsion of transmitting results into IREV. But INEC has now told us also that they have further improved the functionality of beavers, and that e-collation is possible on using the beavers alongside the figure of those accredited at a polling unit. And they said this one will also be transmitted. I think the question many of us have asked is, where is this transmission going? Where is the destination? Where is that place that we can trace it to? So this is something we need to do. How are we sure, because of the legal implications of this? If you cannot transmit in real time, how much time will be real time? Or at what point would you have exceeded the real time that transmission is expected? What happens, as it is likely to happen, that the figures in the Form EC8A, which is hard copy, the IREV, which you don't even see the results transmitted, but it has to go through an internal process of refinement at the back end, which Nigerians don't even know how it works. Suppose there are conflicts in the figures in the three results. What do we do? Do we require a further clarification or amendment in the law to clearly define this, so that we don't on election day, run into a major confusion? And as far as I'm concerned, we need to know the recs, the 37 recs, and the electoral officers. We need to be given dedicated capacity building and knowledge on how this system works. I've complained that in the last election, 2023, the only category of people that were not given training were the electoral officers. And if you want the election to fail, make sure they don't have the requisite knowledge. We need to do that training, and we need dedicated engagement to how the beavers will work on election day. We need dedicated engagement and capacity building on the result transmission and collation processes. And we need to be empowered to explain this to our stakeholders, because between now and the next election, we have to do heavy stakeholders consultation in order to explain this process for the public to understand that INEC is ready to be transparent, and that what we are going to do in the collation and transmission processes will be open for public scrutiny. I think this is something that we must do, between now and the election. And I think that we need, I believe that the Nigerian public should put the commission, including me, under pressure. They should be able to demand accountability, and we need to be open, and we need to ensure that there is public confidence. And we need, between now and the election, to carry out stress tests on the beavers and be sure that we are going to deploy technology that will be reliable. And of course, there are other details that are very administrative in terms of making availability, and that's purely a procurement issue. The adequate number of beavers that are needed for actual deployment, the additional that we need as markup, and we need to take training of the RAG techs and the L techs who will be moving around on election day to attend to malfunctioning beavers, the kind of training that will equip them for that kind of election day activity. And my point, therefore, is that civil society holds a major key on behalf of Nigerian citizens to hold INEC accountable, because there are many things to do, and time is not very much on our side. I want to stop here and listen to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. We really appreciate those insights. And I've been seeing comments, people just saying how a lot of what you have said has resonated with them. So at this point, I would like to ask if there are any participants who have questions. You can drop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll give you the ability to speak. Prof, there's a question here that says, how does the Electoral Act 2026, balance the need for electoral transparency with the protection of voters' personal data?
Okay.
Yes.
Come again.
It says, how does the Electoral Act 2026 balance the need for electoral transparency with the protection of voters' personal data?
Well, my understanding is we are deploying the technology we are deploying, particularly for the purpose of election, is the familiar beavers. And what beavers help INEC to do is to ensure that there is no identity theft, and that the people who are on the register, or those who have our PVCs, are the people who are actually voting. And the two levels of accreditation, we already know, either the fingerprint, and where it fails, you go for the facial capture. But in terms of the protection of all I do know is that we have received assurance from INEC that number one, that the technology we deploy cannot be hacked and that the security is guaranteed. And so my understanding as somebody who is not that technology savvy is that INEC has already, a guarantee that the technology we are deploying cannot be violated by any outsider. So on that basis, I do think that the personal data of voters and Nigerians who are on our register and who can be easily located by beavers, is actually preserved or protected. But we need to know, because the promise has been that our equipment cannot be hacked and that it is protected.
Mm. Okay, thank you for that question, Prof. So there's another question here from Omi Makinde Sheyi. Says, my question is on the Electoral Act, specifically Section 63, subsection 3 of the Act, which gives INEC discretionary power to adopt other methods when the beavers fails to work and is replaced with Omi Makinde Sheyi. So I think your question is not very clear. You said, and was replaced another section which talks about the ballot paper security. But I can see the thoughts, but I can't see what the question is. So what exactly are you asking regarding that section of the Electoral Act? You can clarify or also raise your hand, and I'll unmute and give you access to speak. I'll go to persons who I can see their hands raised. Okay, I can see that Shay's hand is raised, so I'll start with you so you can clarify your question.
Okay.
Omi Makinde Shay, I've asked you to unmute. Please unmute and ask your question. Okay, I can see that you're unmuted. Please ask your question.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. If you're speaking, we cannot hear you. At least I cannot hear you.
Doing? Please, my question is to Prof. Section 63 sub 3 of the Electoral Act 2026 actually talks about that INEC presiding officer has discretionary power, especially when the beavers fail to work and it is not replaced. What that section means is the presiding officer can actually sumoto convert to manual accreditation and the voting will continue, because the discretionary power means you can do whatever you like during the election. There is another section of the Act, Section 134, which talks about when INEC paper does not have the secret. There's this secret security in ballot paper, that where there are some ballot paper that does not have that security, and the presiding officer deem it fit to be original, the election can continue. And if it deem it fit to be a fake, he can reject it. That's where the question is coming from. This particular section raised concern about issue of public trust, how the public will trust the process. What can Prof provide to this section, and how we can go forward telling the public that they should still trust INEC in the light of this new Electoral Act? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your question. Over to you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you. I think we must start by admitting how things are done differently in Nigeria compared to other jurisdictions, where, for example, INEC, after the end of an election, carries the weight of making proposals for amendment to the law in such a way that the law can be a step ahead of the previous framework that we use. But here, the lawmakers play a major role in the law. I know that INEC had a lot of proposals that were sent to the National Assembly for the purpose of legal amendments for the 2026 Act. Many of them did not see the light of the day. So we are face to face with what we have also said since the 2026 Act was passed, in February. Namely, there are many untidy provisions. There are many ambiguities. And there are many provisions that set the stage for confusion, and for further eroding public trust. So, and I think this is something, that we can all collectively work on. For example, I don't see why the law should give a presiding officer discretion when the procedure is very clear that when a voter approaches a presiding officer with his permanent voter's card, which is not read by the beavers, and then they are able to prove that is on the voter's card and the person is accredited either through facial capture or through fingerprint identification, and then you proceed to vote. This process is clear. I don't understand how discretion of a presiding officer will come in when the rules are clearly, procedures are clear and unambiguous. So my point is that kind of thing is a recipe for confusion, and I think that if we still have the room to tinker with the law for more clarity and to be very straightforward and to pass, that, the test of public trust and confidence, I think we need to remove all those confusions from this law because it's clear enough about procedure, before a person is allowed to vote at the end of the day. So what is the level of training of presiding officer to know whether a ballot paper
I don't know if it's my network or Prof, but Prof, if you can
to be
hear me.
able to get to that level, of dexterity. So I think we need to remove ambiguity and in the name of creating public confidence and building trust, have legal provisions that are very clear and not amenable to misinterpretation or causing confusion.
Thank you, Prof. I know that there's always this debate between lawyers and political scientists about interpretation of law, but yes, there's need for that clarity. Thank you for that. Before we take the other questions that I can see, I would like to bring up our program manager. We had shared earlier that we, as the organizers of this webinar, are a cluster under the EUSDGN program, and the EUSDGN is managed by someone who she is our boss actually. Please, let's put our emojis and our welcome in the chat for Laolu Olawumi. Laolu, if you can hear me, I have asked you to join the panelists so that we can highlight you, we can spotlight you, and I've asked you to unmute as well.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and good afternoon. I'm so sorry. My intention is not to disrupt the flow of the question, so maybe we can just get back to that, but to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to join this meeting today. There are very many important questions that we have had. I think coming from the Electoral Act 2026, we are left with more questions than answers. And from what I've heard from Prof, I think that that feeling that we have across board is also shared by people that are also carefully watching the process and are in charge of several aspects of this election administration process. I think it's a refreshing feeling to know that our concerns are also shared at this sort of highest levels. But I think that for areas where quick remedial actions are needed, we need to make sure that we are all making collaborative efforts to address as much as possible. And for areas where as citizens we have critical roles to play, I hope that we can all begin to identify that and continue to hold our institutions accountable. As we move towards 2027, it is critical that every voter believe that their vote will count and that the government is doing everything possible to ensure that that is the case. I think that anything less would really further undermine the credibility of the process and the public trust that is at a very, very low level as we speak. So as we move towards Oshun and in the run up to the 2027 elections, I hope that we can continue to have conversations like this that helps us better understand what the process is saying, but also, and even more importantly, that would provide a way for us to continue to hold our administrators, the people that are in charge of these very, very critical processes, that continue to hold them accountable for the delivery of credible and transparent elections. I would like to really acknowledge the legislative and judiciary cluster for hosting this event, and also a big appreciation to Prof also for taking the time to share his wealth of experience with us this morning. Thank you very much, and over.
Thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you. Thank
Laolu
you.
Olawumi,
Thank you,
the
Laulu.
ESDGN program manager. Yes, thank you so much
Thank you,
for.
Laulu.
We'll dive right back to the questions, Prof. And the next question here says, how are INEC, security agencies, political parties, and civil society organizations collaborating to ensure that the 2027 elections are free, fair, peaceful, and secure, particularly in the transmission and collation of election results, the security of election materials, and the meaningful participation and representation of women?
Yeah,
Prof, did you get that question?
very well.
All right, please, over to
Very
you, sir.
well. Very well. I think what will be the game changer in this regard, in terms of the security of election materials, of voters, and the entire voting process, is what happens at subnational levels. It's what happens in the states in terms of how resident electoral commissioners understand their duty in terms of stakeholders consultation. And they need to accept that in this critical phase, there can be nothing like over stakeholders consultation. It has to be something that you have to do continuously, until we get to the election. And the ICSES framework, is really a very useful framework for reining in the security agencies, and particularly for recognizing the division of labor among the security agencies. And I know what we have done as individuals in the states, in previous elections. Take, for example, with the fact that NDLA is part of ICSES, we have relied on NDLA to go to neighborhoods where drug users and abusers, uh, take as their colony. They go to raid them. We have done that, successfully. We other immigration, particularly in border areas, in fact, beginning from the voter registration exercise to ensure that foreigners do not come and register for our election. So what is beautiful about ICSES is that all the agencies have their different areas of specialization, and we harness all this. But more importantly, it is a consultation that we do. Some of the recent consultations I have done, and by many recs, are consultations that bring ICSES members, civil society, and other stakeholders together. In fact, last week, Wednesday, we had a major presentation on electoral security, and we brought resource persons and those who are experienced, in the field, particularly the police, because we are using the operational order of the police. So we just have to do stakeholder consultation. We have to do with women groups. We have to do with the disabled community. We have to do with IDPs. In fact, one of the major things I have done since I came to Plateau in April was to begin to look for IDPs. And when I decided to do research about IDPs, I couldn't believe that we have IDPs that that stand the risk of not voting in the 2027 election. And INEC has a framework for IDP voting. So we are using that to ensure that whoever is displaced, whether you live within the community or in camps, you are able to vote on the election days. So my answer to this is we require to do a lot of stakeholders consultation, and we require to explain the processes, to all stakeholders. And I think we are doing that. But we, at the same time, there are many parts of the country where there is ongoing civil disorder, people, communal violence. There is security problem everywhere. And in Plateau, for example, and in Niger and many states, it's an ongoing thing that where you think was peaceful yesterday can undergo combustion tomorrow. And we are using our electoral officers to map the real flashpoints in their different local governments and the different agencies. In our meetings, we also ask them from their own operational point of view to also share with us their basic intelligence, about where, breach of peace would likely occur. And we are harnessing and harvesting all this for the purpose of informing deployment, of security personnel on election day. And this is something that you do on a continuous basis, and you can never be tired because it's so critical. Because every meeting I hold, there are questions that confirm to me that there is a lot that I want to know and don't know. So we need to continue to engage.
All right. Thank you, Prof. I don't know if that was the end of your intervention or it's just network.
Oh,
Prof,
me?
please. Okay, you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay,
No,
all
I've
right.
answered the question, so there can be other questions.
Yes, there are other questions. So this question says, Prof, do you think that this question is from Samuel Guche. Prof, do you think that the current provision relating to the real-time electronic transmission of election results to the IREV will make a difference, considering the judicial holding that the IREV is not a collation center? Has anything changed from the previous legal regime?
Yeah, thank you, Sam Oguche. I hope it's a Sam Oguche that I know.
Yes, Prof.
Yeah, when the debate was on about real time or no real time, I didn't find so much usefulness in that debate because all the things that were being said in that debate are not different from what we did in previous election, especially in terms of what we did in 2023. It is always that when you finish election in the polling unit and there is no network availability for you to transmit your result to the IREV before moving to the next level of collation, which is the word collation. You don't have to stay fixated in that place. You know, you already have snapped from EC8A, and then you are proceeding to where word collation is taking place. Once you find network, you then at the next opportunity, you transmit that result to the IREV. And where there's no network availability, there is no law that can make it happen. So what is important is what we are able to do as a matter of fidelity to the process. Because if you are in an area, and INEC has interesting data about blind spots across the country. So if you have not improved, availability of network in those blind spots, nothing in the law will create that network in 2027. So the important thing is once you are in an area that you don't have network, you move to the next level, and as soon as there's network, you do it. But what I think is important is the faithful implementation by our presiding officers, is a faithful implementation by those people that we have trained in terms of what our processes are. Because if indeed the chairman of INEC is in charge of a polling unit and there is no network there for him to transmit that result to the next level, there is still a problem. But we need to make the best of the worst situation. And you cannot rise above the technology infrastructure of your country when you are conducting election. It has to be national infrastructure. It has to be national facilities. So where they are not present, I don't know, but we need to work seriously and strenuously to satisfy the demands of the law. That is the only thing that will make a difference.
Thank you so much for that intervention, Prof. The next question I can see here says from Usman Haruna, said, my question is, in case where the results that are uploaded to IREV differs from that in the EC8, in the form EC8, I don't know if it's EC8A or EC8B now, but the question says differs from that in EC8 form. Which of the results will prevail?
Okay, thank you, Davak. I raised this question earlier.
Yes.
We are actually dealing with three different forms ECA. One is the physical copy, which results are manually entered into and signed by party agents. Okay, that's one. And the law says that supposing you cannot transmit, that particular hard copy result becomes the primary result to rely on. Now, the second form, EC8A, is the one on the IREV. And the expectation is that transmission is possible and it will go into the IREV. But what I also have learned is that between the time you transmit that into the IREV, there are some back-end verification that goes on before public viewing is possible. So that is the second from EC8A on the IREV. And the third from EC8A is actually on the beavers. You use the beavers to do that together with the number of accredited voters. So the question is, if there is a conflict between the three, which one do you rely on? I think this is the question that all of us, even those of us who work in INEC, for practical purposes and what to do when it occurs, we need to ask questions and we need clarification. That is my point.
So, Prof, if you in INEC are asking question and looking for clarification, where does this clarification now come from?
No, you see, the point is this: I am a resident electoral commissioner.
Yes.
The ICT unit that is responsible for configuring beavers is in Abuja, and they work directly with the ICT departments in the states, and when you have something new, you need to explain, and there's sufficient time between now and the election. In fact, I imagine that in the next 2-3 months, these are some of the issues that we have to deal with in terms of internal conversation before it should be timely enough for us to be able to explain to the Nigerian public.
Mm. That is clear and that is understandable. So I can see that there are hands raised. I'm not ignoring those hands. I just want to take the questions that were already typed before and the comments. This is a comment from Yunus Ayao, and I believe he was responding to Shei Omimakinde's question on the discretionary power of presiding officers. And he says, I think the issue is not about hacking, but to what, okay, no, maybe it's on a different question, but let me respond. Let me read it. I think the issue is not about hacking, but to what extent is the database protected from unequal access by political parties, such that some political parties will not have access to personal data of voters for direct campaign targeting, while others do not have access. Okay, yeah, thank you so much for this comment. I believe Mr. Yao was responding to the comment about the question about how do you guarantee the voters guarantee what's it called now, the data of voters. So yes, thank you for that. The next question I can see typed here says, you made mention, Prof, of synergy between INEC and CSO. I remember vividly before the exit of Professor Mahmood, he made a pronouncement that CSOs can monitor party primaries, but there's been no further clarification on it. I guess this question is, so what's the way forward in this new regime or new dispensation of INEC?
Okay. No, I think what the former chairman said is correct, that civic groups can monitor or observe party primaries. And but we need to take it beyond that level. And for me, let the framework of civil society support and collaboration be clearly defined in an MOU, so that they know that in a very formal way they are involved in that process. But if you allow it, to say, okay, I'm a CSO, if I have the capacity, let me go and monitor. It depends upon the amount of resources you have and what you can cover. But I really think that party primaries are the foundations for credible election. And since in our democracy, only people who are members of political parties can actually stand for election, the commission going further should create an envelope large enough to make party primaries monitoring and observation a huge national program. So parties are aware that there's enough public scrutiny of their internal processes, because on their own they don't behave well. We all know that parties are run by oligarchies, and of all the institutions of democracy, they are the least amenable to democratic values. So we need to force, the citizenry on political parties to demand accountability in terms of how they conduct their internal processes, including the election of their leaders, and the election or selection of their candidates for elections. Now, but there's something that I want to say, and if you do not deal with that problem, this country will not move forward in terms of our electoral democracy. Obasanjo was president of this country, and he introduced an idea that has remained stuck, but which has destroyed party politics and party democracy, by saying that if you are a governor, you are the leader of your party. If you are president, you are the leader of your party. If you are local government chairman, you are the leader of your party. What this proclamation has done is that party leaders elected as chairman, secretary, treasurer are merely nominal positions that do not exercise any influence or power in terms of decision making within political parties. And this is what has been leveraged upon by presidents and governors, even before party primaries, to anoint those that will emerge ahead. And you cannot believe the level of horse trading that goes on. A governor has a candidate, president has a candidate, and you are challenging those candidates. The party will even disqualify you from contesting. And we think this is a very unimportant issue. For me, this is the cradle of violation of democratic politics in this country. We have to embark on advocacy, to dissociate governors and presidents from controlling political parties, because that is the problem.
Indeed, it's a problem that needs to be solved. Thank you for that intervention, Prof. So before I continue with the questions in the chat, this hand has been raised for a while now. Utsa Ushahemba Vitalis, please unmute. I've asked you to unmute and to ask your question.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon, Prof, and thanks for that wonderful
Yes.
presentation. Yeah. So, my name is Utsa Vitalis Shahimba, and the Legislative Liaison Officer of Caritas Nigeria, Catholic Secretariat of Nigeria. So, my question is about the first milestone that you said that has been achieved, which is on the continuous voter registration. I don't know whether it is my own understanding of what continuous means. I don't actually know, but I want to be clear. What is continuous voter registration that has been terminated in 6 months or 8 months before elections? Because the fact is that in the next 8 months or 7 months that we have our elections, there are people who will attain 18 years, even from tomorrow. And if we call this CVR, then why disenfranchise them so early? That is my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First, continuous voter registration is provided in our constitution to make election as inclusive as possible and to build credibility into the voter register. Those who turned 18 after the previous election are the primary targets of continuous voter registration. But when we do CVR in Nigeria, we open the door to many other people, including those who though have been above 18, who though are 40 and have not registered. They have the opportunity to do fresh registration. We can't turn them back. But it's also an opportunity for people who have to correct certain biometric biodata on their voters card. For example, date of birth, or those whose permanent voters card are defaced, they have to come to INEC so that a new one can be issued to them because you can neither read their names or read their face, to match it with what is on the voter register. There are many people, or those who want to transfer their voting location in the next election. So CVR is for all those people. Now, there has to be a cutoff date, because of we are not using e-voting. If we are using e-voting and the processes are simplified, you can, even on the eve of election, register and vote the following day, but you need that time for INEC. There's a window they require to do all that is necessary to satisfy the requirement of printing, so that is the issue. If you are doing registration and you print your card on the spot, maybe it is possible to do the kind of thing you are envisaging. But if we have to go the way we are, allow reasonable time, then you need a cutoff date for INEC to do the internal processes, to be able to print the voter's card and make them available. I think that is a problem.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that intervention. Before we continue taking the questions, I want to bring up the convener of Plague Situation Room, Mr. Yunus Ayel. I know I saw his hand earlier and I read his intervention, but I'll also bring him up. Mr. Yao, if you can hear me, I've asked you to unmute. Please unmute and take the mic. I can see that you have unmuted, but we can't hear you. At least I can't hear you. Mr. Yunus Ayal, can you hear me? Okay, you have muted your mic again. I'll ask you to unmute.
So can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear now. Good morning or good afternoon.
Great. Yes. Thank you very much, and thank Prof for the presentation. I was just responding to the reply you had on the question about privacy of data. And
Okay.
so you are linking that to the issue of hacking. And I was saying that the issue of privacy for personal data is not actually just about the hacking. It's about also unequal access to such data. Right now, we have incidences of unsolicited messages that people just pick your telephone number or email and send you messages, which is illegal. And such data, phone emails comes from some data repositories. And so we are saying that it could also be possible that political parties can have access to personal data of voters, such as these telephone numbers, email, and begin to send direct political campaign messages to using those data, the phone, the email, and so forth. Now, the question is that the equity is involved. If one political party has that access to that data, then all political parties should have. So we are saying, if how are we sure that one party, two parties will not have access to that data, and while others do not have. Now they, by the Data Protection Act, they are not supposed to have access to that data, but we've seen political parties sending direct targeted political messages to voters, meaning that they actually have access to such data from somewhere. So we are saying that how are we sure that INEC data would actually be well protected such a way that political parties cannot access them, use it for campaign purposes? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yunusa Yao, the convener of Nigeria's Civil Society Situation Room. Thank you for that intervention. I don't know if Prof wants to respond to the comments that he has raised.
Yeah, I would like to. I did YZ. I didn't know your name is Yunusa. I only knew you as YZ. I didn't know that Y stands for Yunusa. It's only today I got, so thank you for that, YZ. But I think what you are saying is valid, and I think there was a particular instance not long ago that they had access to a voter's data, and that became an issue. But I think we need to make a distinction between willful sabotage or crime, something the deliberate attempt by INEC officials, to work against the commission in terms of doing it for their personal benefit to politicians. That, for me, is one leg of the problem. But the other one is systemic access, by outsiders, which, as you said, could either be from other sources, because I also get people I've never met call me, and they are saying I'm this, I'm anyway. But I think it's something that we need to watch out and raise, as a matter of public concern, for preemptive, efforts that can save, citizens from this kind of thing. I think you are a more technology savvy person, so you know how. But I think we need to make a distinction between willful, deliberate, commission of crime by INEC people, for personal benefit, as opposed to institutional loophole that people can exploit.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much for that, Prof. So I will just go back to the questions that we have. This question is from Sunday Ruben, and he asks, how does INEC intend to improve the deployment and reliability of election technology, including voter accreditation and result management systems, to minimize technical challenges experienced in previous elections? Prof, are you still with us? Did you hear that question? Professor Ego, if you can hear me. Okay, it looks like we asked a question about a technical glitch, and a technical glitch happened to Prof. We'll wait a few minutes to see if we can get him back. Again, we have to say a big thank you to everyone who has been with us from the beginning of this webinar, excuse me, and even for those who joined us, later on. If you joined anywhere, between and you have not been able to fill the attendance form, please look in the chat and you'll see there's a link to a Google Doc that we would love for you to fill out for our attendance and administrative purposes, as well as to help us with the post-webinar communication. Prof, you're back. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if you heard the last question, but I'll just take it again. It's from
Yeah, thank
Sunday
you.
Ruben, and he asks, how does INEC intend to improve the deployment and reliability of election technology, including voter accreditation and result management systems, to minimize technical challenges experienced in previous elections?
Okay. I think it's a big challenge, and all of us have to address it. Even though those of us who work in INEC, we are first and foremost citizens, before we work for INEC, and therefore these are issues of genuine concern to all of us. And there's something people outside may not understand, and I need to explain. INEC has always made a distinction between what is the commission and what is not the commission. The commission, as you do know, comprised of 13 members. The chairman, who is first among equals, and 12 other national commissioners. And they make policy for the organization. And these are the concerns that they need to address on daily basis. And we are also asking questions because I don't think the problem with our election, except it is human factor, is because the technology has failed as technology. This is my understanding. It's not because the technology has failed as technology. There have been issues of beavers that don't work on election day. Replacement is sought. There are malfunctioning beavers. We have deployed trained, INEC staff, whether permanent or ad hoc, who go around to attend to malfunctioning beavers. So, and if you look at the failure rate of beavers, I don't think it has threatened the integrity of the election. And where there is a problem is because of the human error. But I think what INEC will do, as usual, is to carry out stress tests, namely to ensure that we ensure before election that the beavers we are going to deploy will work. We are also going to do a lot, in terms of the administrative steps we take for the charging of beavers. And this is a huge, activity done by the states. And they provide all the facilities. We have dedicated rooms. So even before beavers are deployed, we make sure that the worst is 80% charge of the beavers, and I want to commend INEC that as far as preparing beavers for election purposes is concerned, they have done well in terms of providing facilities for charging the beavers, for providing all the accessories and the logistics of their movement. So that I know, but other than that, there's nothing else I can say. But we will have to work to make sure that the beavers or the technology we deployed are ready to be deployed.
Thank you for that. Indeed, the technology needs to be ready to be deployed. I will take this next question. It says, "Good morning, Prof, and everyone. Thank you for speaking truth to power." Okay, this is just a comment on some issues that the Commission is facing and how are we. Well, this attendee is just saying thank you to you for your insights, and we truly appreciate your being here with us and sharing from your wealth of experience, Prof. This next question says, on this from God's time, Ezekiel, as an umpire managing this electoral process, what internal and operational mechanisms are INEC putting in place to prevent cases of mutilation of election results between the polling units and RAC centers to strengthen the integrity of the 2027 elections, which the Electoral Act itself somehow deliberately seeks to undermine?
Well, my response to that is that we can't do more than we are doing. One, we train all the ad hoc and regular staff we are deploying on ethics we commit them to swear to an oath of secrecy and to oath of integrity. So other than that, there's nothing else we can do. But the ultimate we need to do is for INEC to have the courage to punish and use as practical examples those who willfully subvert and undermine the electoral process. That once you have 10 people who do it and you met out the appropriate punishment, that is the lesson that will discourage others. So that will to be able to punish those who commit infractions is very important. And for me, it's more important than the advice and the oath we subject our staff to.
That will to punish, Prof, that
Yeah,
is really a muscle that needs to be exercised, because so far
I agree.
we have not exercised it. This question says, Prof, thank you very much, sir. Given that the transmission of results was one of the major sore points during the 2023 elections, my question is twofold. First, how prepared is INEC at this stage? And second, how can the commission be effectively supported to strategically employ the tool of devil's advocacy, not only to anticipate and thwart the subversive plans of politicians, but also to proactively develop a comprehensive mitigation plan, specifically addressing the transmission of results in light of the opacity around the newly passed Electoral Act? I think you have touched this question a bit, but if there's any
Yeah.
further response you want to give to it, or do we go to the next question?
No, go to the next question. But I think what is very good for us is that Nigerians are openly demanding accountability. And that is the path to go, because it's a duty to be accountable to the Nigerian people. And we must demand that.
Yes, we indeed must demand that. There's a first part of the question, though, about how prepared INEC is at this stage to fix these issues around transmission of results as we go into 2027. Can you?
I think at the highest level of the commission, the commitment we are getting and the messages that we are receiving is that everything will be done to cure the mischief of the past, that everything will be done to restore public confidence and integrity. I think INEC is also aware to a large extent that the public is not satisfied. And for me, INEC has demonstrated, whether you like it or not, that it has been a responsive organization, in the sense that if you look at our process, what it is today is not what it was in 2007. The progress has been slow. It has been very incremental, but we have moved from a very bad, point to a point that, and in fact, let me tell you, my reasoning is that the fact that Nigerians know so much about the weaknesses of our electoral process is because the commission has opened up the process to public scrutiny. Because once unless you are stupid, once you adopt technology, you cannot hide anymore, because digital footprints are difficult to cover. And that is what I tell people, that we should realize on our own. By making a choice to go in the way of technology, we cannot hide anymore.
Indeed. Indeed. All right. Thank you for that, Prof. So this question says, you pointed out INEC having a data for the blind spot for network transmission in Nigeria. With this information, does INEC have any plans on what to do with this data to reduce the issues of network?
Again, I think what I do know, and I can say this very emphatically, is that the chairman of INEC today, like the previous one, has understood the reality of blind spots, and they have stepped up conversation and engagement with the Communication Commission, the NCC. And I understand that even the current leadership of INEC is doing a lot of engagement and discussion with them because of common concern about, sports that there are no networks. And they are talking with major network providers, to be able to update the data, have clear information before election time, so that you also know which network works better or best in particular locations. That is going on, so that if you are dealing with a place where is glow that is strong, you tend to then bend your, the services you are going to rely on in that. So I think that is being done, and they are fully aware of this.
Okay, we look forward to seeing, that the outcome of these conversations play out during the 2027 election. This question says, on the question of online printing of PVCs, I believe INEC needs to clarify who is eligible to print their PVCs online, as I am not sure this applies to everyone.
My understanding, and I have engaged some people who should know better, on this matter. My understanding of online printing of PVCs is that all Nigerians who can print their PVCs online, that is what the law is saying, is there. It didn't say this category of people can print. I think the more important question to ask, and this is something I have asked, is that do we have arrangements in place? Is it possible if I am determined to print my own PVC online, within a particular time frame to election, that the commission is ready for that to be possible? I think that is a more important question to ask. That is not something we write on paper, but that in reality, when faced with the choice of printing your PVC online, you can do it with ease. That for me is a real question.
All right, thank you again for that intervention, Prof. This question says, what will INEC consider a successful 2027 election, and what benchmarks should Nigerians use to independently assess whether the commission has met that standard?
Well, it's a matrix of factors that you need to consider, because to conclude that a particular election is free, fair, and acceptable, first of all, can be measured by the level of acceptability, you know, and we have seen that, it is possible in terms of newspaper commentary, in terms of what people say on the social media. I want to say that will be the most important judgment in terms of whether they think the outcome approximates the will of the people, and I think the word is approximation, because even in the best of democratic elections conducted by the most advanced democracies, you cannot see a perfectly, credible. But once election is in accordance with the will of the majority, and we can measure that in many ways. One, what is the proportion of voter turnout? It's clear. I don't have a single answer to why voter turnout is low, but I do think that somehow the memory of Nigerians about the connection between election outcome and governance has discouraged many of them. I want to see people having more confidence in our electoral process and coming out to vote, so that we don't have a situation in which we claim to have over or close to 100 million people on the register, and of this, only 25%, is coming out to vote. That is not healthy enough for a democracy. So the level of voter turnout can be a measure of public confidence in the process and therefore their participation. For me, this is very key. We will also know from the amount of ballots that are invalid whether we have done adequate education of voters. Because if in a polling unit where you are recording 800 votes and 150 ones are invalid, there's still a problem with the education of the voters. In fact, there can be many measures, but I think that a credible election is the one that is greeted with popular positive accolades and response.
All right, thank you for that. Those are really markers and indicators that every meaningful Nigeria should look out for. I believe this is the last question. This person says, okay, this question is from Akinwumi Ayobami. Says, good morning, Prof. and everyone. Thank you for speaking truth to power on some issues that the Commission is facing. And the question is, how are we sure that some of these issues, like printing of voters' cards, distribution and collection process, are not being used to disenfranchise citizens?
That will be a tragedy. That will be a tragedy for 2027. And I think that out of enlightened self-interest, INEC will not do that. INEC would uphold, the commitment to the Nigerian people to make this election participatory, inclusive, and therefore the only way this can happen is that you print these cards timely and do a lot in terms of logistics for collection so that people have the opportunity to exercise their right to vote.
Thank you so much. You have made mention on some very key issues here, and it is important that everyone who has paid attention, goes forth and thinks of how, in our individual capacity, as stakeholders in different capacities, we will begin to, take action on some of these things. And Prof, we thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate your sharing your time and your knowledge with us. As we bring this webinar to a wrap, I'm going to be inviting Elizabeth Abu, who is a member or who is from the Nigerian Women Trust Fund, and they are members of this cluster, to give us closing remarks and vote of thanks. Even though I can see Nkiri's video on, so I suspect that Nkiri is about to take this from me. Nkiri, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for that wonderful moderation. Thank you, Prof. I mean, this has been a very, very insightful session. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. We've kind of maintained a steady participation of about 80 plus participants. We're supposed to have like a quick key takeaways, I think, on the agenda before Elizabeth's vote of thanks. So, because I was taking notes, I feel that Prof's presentation was very, very clear, very comprehensive, and doesn't actually need much, should I say, recapping. But, just for the benefits of participants who didn't join us from the very beginning, I'll just say, just highlight a few takeaways from today's session. One is that credible elections depends not only on strong laws, but also on the capacity, integrity, and willingness of institutions to implement them. I think that was the very first point Prof made when he began his presentation. Prof also spoke about party primaries being the foundation of credible elections. and that they require stronger monitoring, transparency, and internal democracy. He suggested that INEC and civil society establish a formal framework for monitoring political parties, candidates, campaign conduct, and party primaries. He noted that training of election personnel remains a major weakness. Ad hoc staff need more time, practical access to diverse devices, and timely training materials. Another key takeaway is that technology can improve transparency, but it must be supported by reliable infrastructure, trained personnel, and realistic contingency plans. And then INEC must clarify how discrepancies between physical polling unit results, IREB uploads, and BVAS records will be resolved. It was also noted that results collation remains one of the most vulnerable stages of the electoral process and requires strong safeguards. That voters' personal data must be protected from unauthorized access and use for targeted political campaigning. The electoral misconduct must attract visible and appropriate sanctions, warning, and that staff oaths alone are not sufficient, and that misconduct must be penalized. He also talked about institutional weakness with respect to INEC and in prosecution of electoral offenses, ICPC, EFCC. And then he noted that civil society and citizens must continue to monitor preparations, demand remedial action, and hold electoral institutions accountable. And finally, that every voter must have confidence that their vote will count. Failure to build that confidence will further weaken public trust in the electoral process. Then finally, I think there's a clarification. There's a question on online printing of PVCs. I just want to note that Section 18, according to Section 18 of the Electoral Act, I think that applies only to replacement PVCs and not to initial issuance of PVCs to newly registered voters. Again, thank you very much, Prof, for this very insightful presentation. Thank you, Jennifer, for the fantastic moderation. And before Elizabeth does the vote of thanks, just housekeeping from Plaque. We have evaluation forms on the chat box. Please use the link to fill in the evaluation form. There is also a data reimbursement form. Please also fill that, and then attendance. So I think there are three things: the attendance form, data reimbursement form, and evaluation form. I think at this point, I'm going to hand over back to Jennifer. Thank you very much, Prof. Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you.
Thank you, Nkiru. Before I hand over to Elizabeth, there's one final question, Prof, which I think this is quick. It says, is there a definite date when cards for new registrants will be out from DGA?
There is no definite date that I have been informed, but we are expressing anxiety about the delay in printing the cards. And INEC headquarters is getting our messages, and they too have given continuous assurances that every effort is being made to print them timely enough for collection.
Okay, thank you for that. So we hope that the HQ will take action as quickly as possible. Again, just to reiterate the housekeeping, that there's a form for data reimbursement. It's in the chat. Please let's fill it. But for you to be eligible for data reimbursement, you will need to have signed the attendance, which we had announced from the beginning. The link for the attendance is also in the chat, and please fill the evaluation form so that we know how best to continue to provide, value to persons within our community. Elizabeth Abu, if you're ready, I will hand over to you now for the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Abu. I work with the Nigerian Women Trust Fund. So I want to use this medium to, I don't know if everyone can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's insightful section on the 2027 electoral calendar. I want to appreciate sincerely our speaker, Professor Samuel. We really appreciate you for sharing your valuable expertise and all the ideas and all. We want to really appreciate the section. It was really impactful. And also our moderator, Jennifer, thank you for expertly guiding this discussion. We appreciate you. And we'll also use this opportunity to acknowledge the generous support of the European Union, support to democratic governance in Nigeria. That's the EUSDGN program. Thank you so much for your support. And also, I won't fail to acknowledge our cluster. Thank you all for participating, for the preparation and everything. We appreciate you. And also, all our participants, we appreciate you. Thank you all for joining us. As we conclude, let us carry these insights forward and continue working together to strengthen Nigerians' democratic process. Thank you all for your participation and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you to everyone. We truly and deeply appreciate your presence, your time, your contributions. It has all made this webinar very meaningful and very enlightening. We wish you the very best and as you carry on with your day, may you have a productive and a rewarding day ahead. Thank you from myself. I've had the privilege of being the moderator. My name is Jennifer Dafwat, and I represent TAF Africa as part of the Legislative and Judiciary Cluster. Thank you again to everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Jennifer. Thank you.
Bye. Please, we'll leave the platform open for 15 minutes so that participants can have access to the forms, but the webinar is officially closed. So please look for the links on the chat box. Thank you.